My homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One, the fundamental teacher in this lifetime, in my life, the Buddha, the Awakened One, to every good, true, and liberating teaching of the Dhamma, and to every member of the Sangha that has awakened, really gained a foothold in the path, had a vision of deep peacefulness, and gone beyond all suffering and distress, abiding in our world with loving kindness and compassion until going to final peace. My greetings to the venerable monastics and to all friends who have gathered together and who are gathered considering the Dhamma, the Buddha Dhamma, in relationship to climate change and to our environment. So we're faced with a vision of humanity run amok, fractured and broken humanity in a way blindly driven by ignorance, greed, petty hatreds and conflicts with one another, destroying ourselves and the planet, the very base for our embodied life, and even the image of the earth and whether the earth can recover and return to balance again after humanity is gone, if humanity has not utterly destroyed the earth altogether. Such a sad, very sad and awful sort of picture. And one has to wonder, where do these ideas come from? Where does this come from? And is this necessarily the destiny of humanity? Or are there other possibilities for us? How could it be that humanity could continue to exist on this planet, this lovely blue and green planet of ours, that's not entirely polluted? Could it become, with our abiding here, again unpolluted, clean, beautifully habitable for both humanity and other forms of life? Is there another vision? Is there another possibility for us? A sustainable future where we do not self-destruct here, but where we grow in wisdom, where we hold another vision for what is possible for humanity, not only an opt-out at the end of the Armageddon out of grace by other power, but a vision where human beings themselves can awaken, and there is an actual path for awakening, a path that's not only for a chosen few or for a particular race or for a particular ethnic group, but one that is available and open to all of humanity and can be cultivated and developed gradually in each of its stages, resulting in the awakening of the Buddha and the many awakened disciples of the Buddha. The path that we have, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the Four Noble Truths. It's been mentioned, let's see, that the Four Noble Truths offer us a template, a plan of understanding and action for tackling any problem at its roots. And I'm very glad to see this as part of the narrative that you may be hearing and looking at this evening. And I believe that this is where we essentially need to look, is to the root, as well as to the trunk, the branches, and the leaves. So many of the things that are spoken about in terms of what we can do regarding climate change and our environment are at the level of the branches and leaves. And this is very important too, but if we don't get down to the root, to the underlying causes, as we look at cause of suffering or cause of disease, cause of the problem, cause of the ill, as the second and really a deeply important one of the Four Noble Truths, looking at the cause, looking at causation. I'd like to look at a particular aspect of causation with you this evening. In the narrative, it mentions that we must be ready to act at the systemic level, so not only at the root, but at the level of systems, to seek more sustainable alternatives to the deep structures, social, political, and economic. I would add here the moral, theological, and ideological levels which underlie the social, political, and the economic, which inform the social, political, and economic dhammas, or deep structures that are responsible for climate change. So in terms of the moral, theological, and ideological, I would like to take a look at gender ideologies in terms of the cause in the Four Noble Truths, the causal conditions for how we got to be where we are now, understanding that if those causal conditions are changed, if they're undermined, if they're changed, if they become otherwise, the effects will also change. And in fact, for the path, looking at cause, understanding causation, and making wise, informed choices is the path to end whatever ill, whatever suffering, whatever harm has arisen, and to transform it into something else. So as an alternative, to look at the causes for that vision of humanity and the precious opportunity that our embodiment, our incarnation of human beings, that we have with this embodiment in terms of growth and awakening. That vision of humanity living on this earth in a sustainable way, not as a blight, not as a pestilence upon it, not even with the relationship of subdue and conquer, or to have dominion over, as is a very famous phrase from the Christian Bible, actually from the Old Testament, from Genesis, so from the Hebrew Bible. And this idea has been very important in the causation, the underlying causal moral ideology or theologies that have caused us to relate to the earth and to relate to one another in the ways that we have. An example would be recently a Monsanto official was quoted speaking about this moral and religious imperative to subdue and have dominion over the earth. And so we see a major, now multinational corporation with enormous power and wealth, then being informed by, a religious ideology in relationship to our earth, and to the environment, and to one another, to our social and political systems in which such corporations really have enormous effective power. So this is where we see underlying ideology in effect. And in fact, this subdue and conquer, we might, or subdue with dominion, we might ask, where does that come from? I was interested to find that, like for the Hebrew here, the words that are translated now as subdue, kishu, and have dominion over, ridu, originally have a basic meaning of radad, walking upon the earth, and kawash, hugging or holding or cherishing the earth. So what an enormous difference between in pre-agrarian times to walk upon the earth and to cherish it, and all the living beings, the trees, and what are therein called all of God's creatures, with the breath of the Spirit, with living soul. What a big difference to then to tilling the earth, the gendered ideologies of the patriarchal God, or patriarchal military leaders overcoming the feminine, worshipping, earth-based religions, and then we have a moral and religious ideology coming from the religious that supports military conquering and domination, rulership and leadership, and then that those rulers, those conquerors, themselves also supporting those who gave them such rights via religion and such moral and theological imperatives. So these two forces of power, political and religious, then supporting each other in the development of these ideologies. So you can find this happening and developing over time in the Western world, where we have the evolution from an emphasis on feminine wisdom and long earth-based ideas, with great respect for the earth as mother, and cherishing of the earth, and holding it to the subdue and conquer and have dominion over imperative of the warlords, yes, and of the religious leaders who supported them. So it's interesting, we find something similar in Indian history as well. We find the area that the Buddha lived, Greater Magadha, after the time of the Buddha being spoken about by the Brahmins and then written about, at a time when the Brahminical religion had not yet penetrated and dominated that area, and complaints about those barbarians with their samana culture, whether they were the Buddhists or the Jains, and their round structures, their burial mounds, and in contradistinction to like the square of the Brahmins, which was held to be the morally upright form. And then we find in evolution the Buddhist stupas, the original round form, then being encompassed by and held by those squares. Yes, so these are symbols for something that happened in other ways in terms of politics and religion, and the interchange between politics and religion. So we find the development of Buddhism, the development of these other types of gender theologies, and coming into and really growing over time, and in Buddhism and the lands that Buddhism entered into. And if we were to just look at Hinduism, we find the ancient standalone goddesses over time then taking on male consorts who are in the minor position, and then those male consorts growing and becoming equal, and then the scale tipping and the male consort becoming bigger and predominating, and the female then becoming smaller and like the appendage, or even disappearing entirely, with then that male masculine principle becoming the ultimate in humanity, and from the standpoint of humanity, in all forms of existence, especially those that were considered to be higher than humanity. That is the highest of the gods, and their representatives in the kings, and the heads, the male heads of the great religious traditions. A little bit different than the image that we have of the early disciples of the Buddha, in which we find both awakened men and women leading the early Sangha, both leading male and female disciples of the Buddha, and very much a different sort of ideology. Yeah? So for the existence of our Bhikkhuni Sangha, I feel there's a strong relationship here with the predominance of patriarchy in leadership and rulership in some places. Then our Bhikkhuni Sangha, and the fourfold assembly of the Buddha, with both leading male and female disciples, and both men and women reaching their spiritual fulfillment in their earthly embodiment, in these human bodies on this earth, via meditations on the elements, on the body, on the breath, through awakening in this very ground, this very life, in the midst of their humanity, not necessarily needing to be saved or opted out by the grace of any other deity, but through their own practiced embodiment as humans, we find both men and women realizing the ultimate goal of humanity. So this is a really beautiful alternative vision, an ancient one. I don't think that all things from ancient times are necessarily black or backwards, or we don't have to take the perspective of the ancient Brahmins upon the ancient Buddhists, their barbarians and their round shapes and their peaceful ways are all backwards and wrong. In fact, I feel that there is a big shift and change, and that it's very important for us to bring forth these ideas and this sense of vision once again, because from the Buddhist point of view, fundamentally our mind is bright, pure. It may or may not be defiled by adventitious defilements, but those are not our fundamental, essential nature. And that is not the final word on humanity, not at all. These defilements of greed, of hatred, even of ignorance and delusion very much can be lessened, and we can live differently with one another in peaceful interrelationship with each other as humans, and also loving all forms of life. It's not that we don't find beautiful images of Jesus hugging lambs and the lion lying down together with the lamb in Christianity. We do find these beautiful images of healing, of love, of contemplation, of peacefulness, of care for both human and other forms of life, of profound compassion. And we certainly find these abundantly in Buddhism itself. It's very important to realize that according to what the Buddha himself saw after his awakening, we're not fundamentally broken, not fundamentally condemned to lives of just harming one another in ignorance. We can live differently, and there is this path of practice that all of us are either deeply immersed in or have grown near to. So I'm very happy that we have this path of practice. I'm very happy that we're seeing a re-emergence of the feminine in leadership in Buddhism, within the Buddhist Sangha, which is originally, an intentional community, not necessarily a priesthood, yes? But an intentional community in which the women had full rights and responsibilities as the men did, whether as monastics or as lay persons, upasakas and upasikas, in their practice, in their experience, in their sharing of the Dhamma, in their leadership of the Sangha in their various and respective roles. So, what does this mean for us now? This is the question, because as I understand this teaching, for a woman to awaken, in fact, in fundamental Buddhist teachings, in the early Buddhist teachings, a woman does not need to become a man, nor the opposite, but rather we can awaken in this very form and life with these very bodies and live an enlightened and awakened life with one another. We can develop and grow in moral integrity. We have the ability to develop the mindfulness and to be able to develop the deep states of concentration which lead to insight and to wisdom, into causation. effective insight into causation, such that we can see the cause of the sources of suffering, the sources of ill, the sources of harm, and we see what can be done to reduce and eliminate those causes. We can make such wise choices individually and as communities together, as human societies together, and doing so, if a negative cause is removed, if negative causal conditions are removed, everything changes. The effects change. Change comes. And if we cultivate the causes for what is peaceful, healthy, sustainable, kind, harmonious, blessed, beneficent, with loving kindness and compassion for all forms of life. What is it? We would say the sky is the limit, but in this case I would say look to the earth as well. Yeah? Because this is really the ground of our awakening and the place where we have this great opportunity. So developing the path, developing different moral imperatives, developing mindfulness, insight, and wisdom. Let us look into causation and the conditions together, make wise choices, support one another in doing that, and together, if the causes change, then the effects also change. And that beautiful vision of not of a broken humanity, but of an awakening humanity, not of self-destruction in a self-made reign of horror with the destruction of the ground of our very lives, but a very different vision of this being our site of awakening and of the beautiful perspective of the earth, of those who are awakened. So beautiful. If you read the Zen poetry or the poems of our ancient awakened elders, or the vision of the Buddha in the forest with the forest creatures and the way that they lived together in peacefulness and harmony, in mutual supportiveness and loving kindness. This is a very different vision for our humanity. So keeping this in our minds, keeping this in our hearts, let us go this good way. Let us go this good way together. Let us support each other in this practice of the path together, with all of our mindfulness and strength, with all of the insight and wisdom that we can bring to bear upon it for our long-term, long-lasting benefit and happiness and our peacefulness.